This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 24th of January 2026. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the Middle East expert Yossi Mekelberg. Then,
the muskox wool is one of the warmest natural fibres that you can get in the world. It's measured to be up to 8 times warmer than sheep's wool.
We'll hear from the co-owner of a brand in Nuuk selling clothing made from raw local materials. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, the news. Russia launched drone and missile strikes overnight on Kyiv and Kharkiv, killing at least one person and hitting hospitals, housing and energy infrastructure. The attacks came just hours after Ukraine, Russia and the United States opened peace talks in Abu Dhabi, which continue today. Denmark's Prime Minister travelled to Nuuk, Greenland, on Friday after Donald Trump renewed demands for US control of the Arctic territory. The dispute has triggered emergency talks between Denmark, the US and NATO over security in the Arctic. And a major winter storm began spreading on Friday across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas and the US East Coast, bringing snow, ice and record-breaking cold. More than 200 million people across the United States now face power cuts and widespread travel disruption. And that's your Monocle Radio News. And welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin and I'm joined in the studio by Yossi Mekelberg, who's a senior consulting fellow at the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. And you are also a teacher. You're allied to a university.
Yes, good morning. Yes, I'm teaching as a guest professor at the University of Roehampton and the term started. So, by the end of the term, usually you're tired and say you need a break, but then comes the excitement of meeting new students and teaching two postgraduate model, one in crisis management and one in applied international relations. So it's exciting to meet the new students and start the journey of a term.
Absolutely. And you took them actually into Westminster. Tell me what
I did with the help of the local MP, Flor Anderson, of Roehampton. Took them to actually two events. One session with the Select Committee, Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that dealt with auditing basically the government's policies toward China, which was fascinating. Also for the student to see the works of Parliament and of a Select Committee, and then to bring some more excitement to the FCDO question, which we usually look at Prime Minister question, but there is one every few weeks also the Foreign Secretary, in this case Yvette Cooper, with more junior ministers answer for, it was an hour and 20 minutes, not the kind of the shorter prime minister, about everything from Gaza to Sudan, Ukraine, Greenland, just quizzed by MPs one by one, which was followed actually by another motion in Parliament about banning social media for the under 16, which I think we are going towards the Australian model.
Yeah,
but the students were very excited. They're mostly international students, so it was quite a treat.
I mean, that Foreign Affairs Select Committee, I think both you and I have given evidence in front of the committee. And certainly for me, this was back in 2003. I found it extremely intimidating. I was being questioned on Zimbabwe. At the time, I was part of a radio station broadcasting into Zimbabwe from London. And sitting immediately behind me was the Zimbabwean High Commissioner to London. And I felt that I couldn't actually say everything I wanted to because there was this very threatening man and his companions behind me. And eventually I plucked up the courage to say to the committee, I'm sorry, I can't tell you everything I need to because I am intimidated by this man. And in the end, I had to give written evidence privately to them, as well as the evidence that I gave in the room. But it's quite intimidating, not just that particular circumstance, but you are facing this panel of MPs, and some of the questioning is quite hostile.
It depends. First of all, that's why, for instance, at Chatham House, we have the Chatham House rule to prevent someone sitting behind you.
Yeah.
And intimidate you while you are there, because we want to know what people really have to say and not being intimidated, coerced by the powers. At the same time, yes, I mean, the MPs are used to this environment. When you give it once in a while, it's not a familiar environment, as the way, for instance, we sit in the studio, and then you don't some of what you're going to question, some don't like what you have to say. So when you said there might be some hostility, I found it actually very useful exercise. But it's their role to ask you some tough question. There is also in the House of Lords, which is a bit different from the House of Commons. Because in the House of Lords, you have a lot of veterans, for instance, of foreign affairs, which not necessarily, it's more mixed. Also, in the House of Commons, they are very busy. So the House of Lords, for instance, they will sit for the full session. In the House of Commons, here there is a vote, or they need to do something else. So something is a bit unsettling when people are coming and going. But I think you get used to this. And it's still, I think as citizens of this country, it's part of our duty to help the body that oversees the government to have the best knowledge and understanding that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yossi, let's turn our gaze to Russia, Ukraine and the US, because, of course, they've been holding peace talks in Abu Dhabi. The Washington Post has quite a good piece on this, talking about this push to end Moscow's nearly 4-year-old invasion.
Yeah, and I think it's also always you look something a bit what is said and also the architecture of all of it. This is the first time that officials from the United States, Ukraine, and Russia meet together, and it's in a neutral venue. It sends a message that they mean business, that they want to agree. So you never know in negotiation, is it performative because they're not that the United States wants an agreement, President Trump wants to take another war that he ended, so they play the game or they're tired. This is 4 years. You see also the pressure, because only last night Kiev and Kharkiv were attacked badly. This is the middle of the winter in Ukraine, which is a very harsh winter, and no power in the city. So it means no heating system, no light. So maybe there is a push there of two countries that's probably tired. The question is always, you can agree negotiations on almost 95, even 99%. It's sometimes the last percent that is the most difficult to achieve. And in this case, it's the issue of territory. It's for the leadership that if they give up, the aims of the war, for Ukraine to keep the integrity of all of its territory, Russia actually taking, like the Donbass. How can they explain to their constituency why we went for 4 years if we make a war that was so costly and give up on our initial aims? This would be, so then they need to find a formula that both leaders can go back to their own people and say, we achieved what we wanted. Again, talking about teaching, people think that in negotiations, the end of it is everyone is satisfied. I always tell my student, negotiation, you need to have two sides that they're equally unhappy. Yes. And then you have a good agreement.
Yeah, there's always compromise, isn't there? Another big sort of group of people coming together to try and solve things is this Board of Peace. Quite an extraordinary I would say ego exercise, actually, as it is described in some of the papers. Tell us a little bit more. The New York Times is talking about how Mark Carney's been disinvited from the Board of Peace because of that storming speech he gave at Davos.
Yeah, I think we are in the age of ego more than the policies, and one massive ego in the White House that is fed by his own people. You sometimes think, is it Stephen Miller, for instance, Witkoff, Kushner, who is feeding? Because all these ideas of board of this and board of the other, I don't think Trump himself come and write it down and say, oh, here is a great idea. Some people feed him with all of this, and they know that it says to feed his ego. But I know in the UK everyone talks about the Traitors, the reality show. Rescinding, the invitation reminds me that the reality Trump's reality show of the apprentice. You've been fired. You're fired.
Yeah.
So
you've been murdered by order of Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, you misbehaved. You actually spoke truth to power and said we middle powers need to act differently because the big powers decided to completely abandon the rules-based order of post-1945. We believe in this. And he talks about authoritarianism, which obviously refers to Trump. So under these circumstances, we will still believe in this world, with its Canada, Europe, the EU, UK. We should now work together and to try to stop. And he said it the day before Trump actually arrived to Davos for the Economic Forum, World Forum. And obviously Trump doesn't like, he likes to insult everyone. We see actually yesterday again with his completely inappropriate comments about NATO's soldiers in Afghanistan. Really hurting feelings across the continent of people, families that, their loved one was sacrificed in Afghanistan. So on the one hand, he can be extremely rude, but he is very thin-skinned when any criticism. So, when Carney actually spoke the truth, we need to take a different approach. He said, basically, you're fired. You're not. And this is juvenile. That's what people do in high school. If you don't behave the way I want, you're not invited to the party. And that's Trump all over.
Harriet has quite a good analysis of Trump's Gaza plan, talking about how actually this is going over the head of Israel's security cabinet's head.
Yeah. And is it a plan? So when all this Board of Peace came back in September and the Committee of Technocrats, it was specifically about Gaza. When it came out, the new structure, we got something different. A Board of Peace that 61, I think, countries were invited. Most of the European ones in Canada actually refused, even before Trump told Canada that is not invited, because he invited also Putin there. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, there is a bit of irony to invite Putin to a Board of Peace. But then underneath this is the committees and the Board of Peace for Gaza and the government of technocrats. Part of this executive committee invited also Qatar and Turkey, which made Israel very unhappy because they don't see them enemy country, but hostile countries. But it shows that when Trump actually wants something, any resistance with Netanyahu will be just fender.
Yeah.
You don't take it seriously. So I think there is some progress there. I think the fact, my question about it, what the powers of the relation between the executive committee, and that's what the Haaretz said, that between the executive committee, people like Blair and Kushner and Witkoff, and there is an Israeli businessman, there is not in the executive committee, not a single Palestinians. And then the committee of technocrats, 15 Palestinians, that we don't know what the power they have. Do they have a budget? And do they have any administration? So what are they going to do? There are some really good people there, including the leader of the committee, Dr. Ali Shah. But how this is going to move into something tangible, this is the time. OCHA, the UN Humanitarian, says that the situation are still horrific in Gaza. You have more than 18,000 people waiting to be evacuated, including 4,500 children to be evacuated for medical treatment. It's quite a harsh winter, and the tents can't cope with this. So the new tent, food. And while the world and, Trump is building some international mechanisms, there is no sense of urgency. But I think the important thing about what Haaretz says, that when there is a confrontation between Netanyahu government and the United States, the U.S. comes on top. And one of the reasons for that is Netanyahu knows that his best ally for pardoning his corruption trial is Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. There is some good news, though, coming out of the West Bank. Tell us about football diplomacy.
I mean, there is very few in between the good news from the West Bank because the situation there is not great. But on this case, There is a football pitch in a refugee camp, Tate, which is near Bethlehem, and the Israelis claimed that it was built illegally. Now, according to Israel, nothing is built legally in the West Bank, because if you apply to any permission, you probably won't get it by COGAT, which coordinates this kind of thing. But this became sensitive because it went to the UEFA, which is the European football governing. Israel not in the good books of that, because during the war in Gaza, there were countries. Israel plays, I know, strangely enough, plays in Europe, the way that it sings in the Eurovision Song Contest, also whether the national team or teams playing in Europe. So there was a leverage there by UEFA to tell them, don't do it. Your situation or your standing in European football is not great. Put some pressure on government. Don't do it. This is not a fight you want to fight. And the football pitch was saved. I think also I should have put it bluntly, the stupidity. If kids play football, they're probably not involved in other things that you don't want them to be involved. Yeah. Especially under occupation. If I were Israel, I would have built more football pitches instead of destroying others. Make sure that, their jobs, their activities, you go to school, and then you are not, you're not easily recruited to radicalization, especially under occupation. But this is not only a harsh occupation, it's not a very smart one either.
But we have to say that you are slightly biased on this, because we know you are an enormous football fan, particularly of Queen's Park Rangers. And I see you have your scarf with you.
Yes, I have the scarf because we are playing Wrexham later, which is a kind of fancier now team, because they're owned by 2 Hollywood stars. And they've managed within 4 years to come from non-league all the way to championship. So it's going to be an interesting game, and they might even end in the Premiership. So, yeah, there is a game 3:00. It's nicer when it's in August or September, and then later in March, April, the games that in January. But we still love it.
Now, your scarf is made out of wool, as most scarves are, certainly scarves in this country. But if you're in Greenland, your scarf might be made out of seal skin or musk ox wool. So, as we know, Andrew Muller has been in Nuuk. And while he was there, he spoke to designers such as Mia Chemnitz, who's the co-owner of a clothing brand called Cave Ute. So Andrew began by asking her how working with seal skin is different to working with fabric.
Well, you can think of sealskin as leather. Once you make a hole, the hole is there forever. So every time the needle goes in, it has to be correct. And then you can only sew the edge hem. So everything is inside out when you sew it, and you can only do the edges. And then you turn it out, and it has to look beautiful. It has to be right.
How long and complicated a process is it to learn how to do that? Because as you're saying, this has got to be a fairly high-stakes learning process, because once you make a mistake, you can't unmake it.
Yeah, and the materials are expensive. So it's all the way from how do you draw up a seal? When you flip it over and you draw on it, you need to know the seal quite well to know which parts are dark and which parts are light, and you have to mix and match everything. And like when I make a norak, a jacket, I use 7 seals for this, and all seals are different. They have different tones and patterns and stuff like that, and the finished norak has to look like it's one seal. So I can spend hours just sorting my stock of sealskin before I start cutting.
Where do you go about sourcing the sealskin from?
There is only one place to do it here in Greenland. There is a government-owned tanning facility, and they have to buy all sealskin that the hunters want to provide. And that is located in South Greenland. So I buy about 4,000 or 5,000 sealskin from them every year. We only want to use Greenlandic seal because then we know it's a sustainable hunt, and that these animals were hunted for the meat and not for the skin. And also, I don't think that there's anyone in the world that are actually better at tanning seal than this specific facility in South Greenland.
In the store around us, there's quite a lot of sealskin items. Who are the market for that now? Are they mostly worn for their appearance, or do you still believe that the sealskin material is better for keeping people warm and dry than any synthetics?
I don't think it's something that I believe. It's something that I know. The seal has been key to life in the Arctic, ever since people came here. And, I don't think that a lot of technical tests have been done on seal. I don't know about them. But I trust the knowledge and the lived experience of the hunters that wear seal. Like, if I was to go hunting on ice, or if I was to go dog sledding in a blizzard, I would still always feel safer wearing seal than anything synthetic.
Well, I guess it's been keeping seals warm and dry this long. There's a lot of other material here that we can see around the store, and a lot of other garments. What other kind of materials do you work with?
Well, really what we're known for is the muskox wool. Reviewed, the company name, means muskox wool. The muskox wool is one of the warmest natural fibers that you can get in the world. It's measured to be up to 8 times warmer than sheep's wool. And it's soft, and it doesn't trigger the same allergies as many other wools do. And obviously it's a very limited resource, as we can only use the wool from the animals that we hunt and that we eat. So even though we're quite small, we are the largest producer in the world of this muskox wool.
In the last year or so, obviously with a lot of extra attention focused on Greenland, are you seeing any, I guess, accompanying rise in interest in what you're making here?
Yes, we do see that. It feels like everyone is looking at Greenland at the moment, and a lot of people are also trying to show support, and many choose to do that supporting Greenlandic businesses. And it's very evident and easy for people to spot that this is, if you support a business like ours, then you're very directly supporting the Greenlandic economy.
Well, we're looking here at a rack of sealskin garments. Introduce a couple of them, if you would. Well,
this is our anorak, which is quite traditional here in Greenland. I guess that anorak, the word, comes from Greenlandic. It's anorak. It means something that you put on over your head, so it doesn't open in the middle. But it's a jacket that you pull over your head, and it has details where you can kind of adjust to wind and snow conditions. And this is mainly bought by hunters.
How long is the process from start to finish of assembling something like this? And is it just you, or are other people involved?
It depends on whether or not you count in the hunt.
Okay.
Because a hunter had to go out, shoot the seal, skin it, and then the seal skin has to go to the tanning facility in Qaqortoq. If the hunter lives in North Greenland or in East Greenland, then the seal skin has to stay there and wait for the ice to melt so the ship can come and get it. Might be half a year already then. But my working process on a piece like this is about a couple of days.
Okay, well, let's maybe talk about some of the smaller items and some of the muskox wool items as well. So what have we here?
These are, you could say that they are shorts, but made out of muskox wool. And the reason I really wanted to show you this item is that one of the great qualities of the muskox wool is that it can help with chronic pain diseases, such as arthritis. It doesn't heal a broken leg, but it can really give rest to people that are experiencing a lot of pain.
I think we should also point out the very handsome hanger that all these things are draped off. That is a reindeer antler?
It is, yes.
Do you sell those as well, or is that just decor?
No, I don't sell them, but you can find them a lot of places here in Greenland. Just take a walk.
That was Mia Chemnitz speaking to Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller in Nuuk. And you can listen to the full interview on the latest episode of Monocle on Fashion, which premieres at 2000 London time on Monday. Well, still with me and listening to that is Yossi Mekelberg. You were commenting, Yossi, that it's enough to turn you vegetarian.
Probably. Yes, because I'm kind of throwing you the idea that probably I should become vegetarian because I love animals for moral reason. But then, of course, there is the temptation if you grow up eating meat. But, I think if you hear more kind of this item or watch this, you probably it will turn you into a vegetarian.
Although it could just make you a much more sort of experimental cook, or possibly even a surrealist cook. I want to talk here a little bit about Lee Miller, because her culinary style, and she completely reinvented herself, right? So, as we know, early years as a fashion model and artist muse, in the 1930s and 40s, a successful career as a fashion and then a war photographer, and those images usually infused with the surrealist moods that she understood so well. But the sort of fourth act, if you like, of her life was cooking, and she said she had sort of dishes like cauliflower breasts and all sorts of really quite surreal things. She said that cooking is pure therapy, and of course we're being able to examine this now because there is this fantastic new exhibition about her going on right now. Tell us more about that.
And I have to confess, I'm going to actually see it next week. So this is a preview of this. But of course, I know about her work for many, many years. And I think sometimes in this context where you look at her photos, what she did as a photojournalist. And now we all have the mobile phones and we can produce some fantastic photos with very little effort. And this is the time that it was art. You don't have all this technology. And also the thing that, we are used to women being in war zones and serve as war correspondents. Back in the Second World War, it was not something very, very common. And she created some iconic images there because she managed to capture it in a way that it's, on one way, it's realistic, but in a surreal way. They managed to combine between the two. If you see like the famous opera singer, in Vienna, I think it was, or in Paris, I'm confusing now, but singing when everything is devastated around there after the Second World War, and she captured, people are still, engage with her. Of course, it's an iconic photo that she didn't take because she's in the Hitler's bath, not in Berlin, actually, in Munich. So she managed to capture and project images that I think people could relate to and see what happens. And of course, she went also to some of the concentration camps, like in Buchenwald and Dachau. And with the times, again, we are used now to 24 hours news cycle, and we see it real time. This is the time that when you see it first time, it hits you because you didn't see that all the time. And I think more than most, she managed to kind of capture the moment wherever she went.
Yeah. Now, it's really interesting considering things like that. Almost, I'm going to use the word iconic. I dislike using it, but of her in Hitler's bathtub. The Washington Post has this great article, I think it was yesterday, and it's talking about that image of the 5-year-old boy, Liam Conejo Ramos, and this is the boy that was used as bait in the ICE operations. But then it goes on to say about that photograph that it has this moral urgency akin to a small number of photographs that once upon a time had the power to change our behaviour. So, for instance, the 1972 Napalm Girl image of that child running naked in the street after, in Vietnam. That Vulture and the Little Girl by Kevin Carter in 1993. That was the starving Sudanese child. The photograph of the Salvadorian migrant and his 2-year-old daughter drowned in the Rio Grande. All of those really, really important photographs, which really had the power to change things. These are photos that are seared in our memories. The picture of that little boy lying on the beach, drowned in the Mediterranean as well.
Syrian refugee.
Yes, absolutely. All of that. Now, this picture should carry the same resonance, this picture of the 5-year-old boy. But because of fake news, manipulated images, and the sheer horror that we deal with every day, this is just another image.
However, it's very much about our humanity, in this case, our inhumanity. It's obviously, if there is any humanity in one, when you see suffering generally, but definitely of children, that, we are as adults should protect them. And we should prevent all this suffering. And when you see picture like this, and ICE using as a bait to go and knock on the house where he lives, and then the 1,200 miles away from his school. Just imagine how terrified. And then when he grow up and he will realize that he was a bait, the guilt that comes with that because of me, which of course not the case, is because the inhumanity of ICE, his family might be deported. So I think if people just focus on this, Ford said, what are we doing? What are we doing to these young children? What are we doing in our relation to migrants? Because we saw already the shooting of one person in a car. And now we got to a point in order to achieve some political aim, we exploit, or in this case, ICE exploits kids. I think this photo is still, maybe it can be manipulated, but it's still so powerful that it make people think, do we want to be part of it?
Well, to end, let's continue with the idea of giving children the best possible start in life. This is a much more cheerful story. We're looking at Zoran Mamdani, himself making things much more cheerful, and help coming from an unlikely source.
Supported by Scotland, of all places, because there is something which is called baby basket. And one of the main themes for Mamdani during his campaign is about elevating poverty. And New York, on the one hand, there is unbelievable wealth, but homelessness and poverty. It's almost symbolized capitalism in its worst in the discrepancy between rich and poor. So one of the idea is to give pregnant women, send them a baby basket. And it's actually already in Scotland, in Chile, in Finland. It's something common. So you get, before birth, few weeks before that, a basket with some clothes and books and cosmetics, all of the, and even the box is becoming a sort of a bed. So all the idea, because anyone that's actually, the first few weeks are very expensive. So for poor people, it can make a huge difference. So Scotland, in an act of generosity and also ideological commonality, send him an example of this baby basket that every pregnant woman is getting in Scotland. So maybe there is something, in all this we just talk about the inhumanity in some parts of society. There is also commonality of humanity in others.
And they sent this to Mamdani in the hope that perhaps New York might adopt this system. And one aspect that I found really interesting about this is how the influence is coming from non-traditional places. I've just been in India. I keep banging on about this, but honestly, it did change my worldview, because once you start looking at things not through the Western lens, it changes things. And one of the people that I spoke to was Leo Varadkar, who's the former Taoiseach, or Prime Minister of Ireland. And it was so interesting to me, because obviously I then read his book, so I know a lot about his work and policy now, and how much he actually did to influence global events. And Ireland is not the traditional country you would look at, and nor is Scotland, right? You would, normally people go, well, it's Britain as a whole, or whatever. And I just found it so fascinating to see how much these small countries. I mean, and Qatar, of course, is an example of that.
When it comes to mediation, you see, we got kind of almost internalized that might is right, which is not necessarily or rarely the case. And, we got to kind of one of approach to life, the very Western consumerist, capitalist way of doing things, which lost this idea of community, of the wider society, that there is something that's called society, the family, all of this. So you come from a completely, the same, better than me, idea of negotiation in Africa, that people like Desmond Tutu and Mandela promoted so much. And we can learn a lot of it. And the same goes with Ireland, for instance, how they resolved the conflict there. So there is not to say there is no place for Western approach, but we need to learn from other experiences which are very different. Because in many cases, the Western approach, instead of actually resolving conflict, actually exacerbate them, but also the way we live our own life. One of the major curses of modern society is stress, which comes with the very way of life, Western way of life, which other societies learn to deal with it much better than us.
I'm going to have to let you go and wave your scarf at Queen's Park Rangers.
Thank you.
Yossi, thank you very much indeed. Thanks also to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. And Monocle on Saturday will return next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.